The rain hammered against the cemetery gates like bullets, cold and unforgiving, as Emma stood frozen before her father's grave, her black dress clinging to her curves, water streaming down her face, mixing with tears she refused to shed. 3 men in expensive suits surrounded the headstone, their presence wrong, threatening, impossible. The tallest one turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath, and in that moment, something shifted in the air between them, something dangerous and inevitable, like lightning before it strikes. He moved toward her, his gaze burning through the storm, and Emma felt her world tilt on its axis, her heart recognizing something her mind couldn't name, fear and attraction warring inside her chest as this stranger looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. Welcome, besties. Please like, share, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Emma's fingers tightened around the wilted flowers in her hand, her voice barely audible over the downpour.
Who are you?
What are you doing at my father's grave? The tall man stepped closer, water streaming off his broad shoulders, his tailored suit somehow making him look more dangerous rather than refined. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, his olive skin darkened by the storm, and when he spoke, his accent wrapped around her like velvet over steel. Your father worked for my family. I'm Lorenzo Valentino. He owed us nothing, but I owed him everything. The way he said it, with such finality, such possession, made Emma's pulse spike. She stepped back instinctively, her heel catching on the muddy ground. Lorenzo's hand shot out, catching her waist before she could fall, his touch burning through the wet fabric of her dress. Careful, Bella. His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the thunder rolling overhead. His fingers lingered a moment too long before he released her, and Emma felt branded where he'd touched her. The next morning, Emma walked into Mario's diner with exhaustion pulling at her bones, her double shift at the hospital followed by her late-night waitressing job leaving her hollowed out and running on fumes. She tied her apron around her waist, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear as the breakfast rush began filtering through the door. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon grease, familiar and suffocating in equal measure. She grabbed her notepad, forcing a smile she didn't feel as she approached her first table. 2 businessmen, both ignoring her as they discussed stock portfolios. She took their orders mechanically, her mind still trapped in that cemetery, still feeling Lorenzo's hand on her waist, still seeing those impossibly dark eyes studying her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. She'd looked him up last night on her phone, her stomach dropping with each search result. Lorenzo Valentino, heir to the Valentino Empire. Suspected ties to organized crime. Untouchable. Dangerous. Exactly the kind of man she should run from, except her traitorous body still remembered the heat of his palm against her hip. Later that afternoon, Emma was clearing table 6 when the door chimed, and she felt him before she saw him, the air in the diner changing, becoming heavier, charged. She turned slowly, her heart already racing, and there he was. Lorenzo stood in the doorway like he owned the place, his presence commanding every eye in the room, even though he did nothing but exist. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms, a watch that probably cost more than her yearly salary glinting at his wrist. His eyes found her instantly, unerringly, like a compass pointing north. Emma's hands trembled as she set down the dishes, very aware of her stained apron, her pulled-back hair, the exhaustion she couldn't hide. Lorenzo moved through the diner with purposeful strides, sliding into an empty booth in her section, his gaze never leaving her face. When she finally approached him, her notepad clutched like a shield, his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'll have whatever you recommend, piccola. And your time when your shift ends. We need to talk about your father. The way he said it, like her agreement was inevitable, should have made her angry. Instead, it made her knees weak. By the end of her shift, Emma had convinced herself to refuse him, to walk out the back door and pretend Lorenzo Valentino didn't exist. But when she untied her apron and glanced toward his booth, he was still there, 6 hours later, his laptop open, phone pressed to his ear as he conducted business from her worn vinyl seat like it was a throne. He ended his call when he saw her, standing in one fluid motion that showcased his height, his power. She had no choice but to approach him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I can't talk to you. I don't know what my father did for your family, but I want no part of it." Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something possessive and absolute. "Your father saved my life, Emma. He took a bullet meant for me 5 years ago. The debt I owe him, I now owe to you." She felt the blood drain from her face, the diner spinning slightly around her. "That's not how debts work. You owe me nothing." His hand lifted, his fingers grazing her cheek, so gently it felt like a promise. "I owe you everything, and I protect what's mine." The following morning, Emma woke to find a black car idling outside her rundown apartment building, the driver watching her window with professional disinterest. She ignored it, just as she ignored the expensive coffee that appeared on her doorstep with a note in elegant handwriting that simply said, "Drink this. You take your coffee with cream, no sugar." How he knew that, she didn't want to examine. At the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide, she felt eyes on her throughout her shift, and when she glanced out the break room window, she saw men in dark suits positioned around the building's perimeter. Lorenzo's men. Protecting her. Watching her. It should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like being wrapped in something warm and dangerous, like standing too close to fire. That evening, when she left through the hospital's side entrance, Lorenzo himself was waiting, leaning against a sleek black car that probably cost more than her apartment building. "We need to discuss your safety, Piccola. There are people who knew your father worked for me. People who might use you to settle old scores." Emma stopped walking, her bag sliding down her shoulder. "So you're stalking me for my own protection?" His jaw tightened, something dark flashing across his features. "I'm ensuring you survive long enough to realize you belong with me." A few days later, Emma's resistance was crumbling despite her best efforts. Lorenzo appeared everywhere, never intrusive but always present, a shadow she couldn't shake and was beginning to not want to. He sent meals when she worked late, ensured her ancient car suddenly ran perfectly after years of problems, left books she'd mentioned wanting on her doorstep. Small things. Devastating things. Things that proved he was paying attention in ways no one ever had before. When her apartment building's heat failed during a cold snap, she woke to find it mysteriously repaired, the superintendent claiming an anonymous benefactor had covered the costs. She knew. She always knew. It was him. That night, exhausted and overwhelmed, she finally texted the number he'd left her. "Why are you doing this?" His response came within seconds. "Because you work 2 jobs and still barely make rent. Because you give everything to everyone else and leave nothing for yourself. Because when I look at you, I see home." She stared at her phone, tears blurring her vision, something cracking open inside her chest that she'd kept carefully locked away. She shouldn't want this. Shouldn't want him. But God help her, she did. The next evening, Lorenzo invited her to dinner, and Emma surprised herself by agreeing. He picked her up in that same black car, his eyes darkening with approval when he saw her in the simple green dress she'd pulled from the back of her closet, the only nice thing she owned. "You're stunning, Bella." She flushed, and used to compliments, and used to being seen. He took her to a restaurant she'd only read about in magazines, the kind of place where meals cost more than her weekly paycheck. They ate pasta that melted on her tongue, drank wine that tasted like liquid velvet, and talked about everything except his business or her father. He asked about her dreams, her fears, the art she'd abandoned when her father got sick. Lorenzo listened like every word mattered, his attention absolute, intoxicating. When he reached across the table to take her hand, threading their fingers together, Emma felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. "This is dangerous," she whispered. He brought her knuckles to his lips, his breath warm against her skin. The most worthwhile things always are. By the time he drove her home, Emma knew she was in trouble, the kind of trouble that felt like falling and flying simultaneously. Later that week, everything changed. Emma was walking to her car after her diner shift when a man stepped from the shadows, his smile cold and calculating. "Emma Carter, you're coming with me." Before she could scream, he grabbed her arm, dragging her toward a waiting van. Terror flooded her system, her training kicking in as she fought, scratching, kicking, trying to break free. Then suddenly he was there. Lorenzo appeared like vengeance incarnate, moving with brutal efficiency as he ripped the man away from her, his fist connecting with her attacker's jaw with a sickening crack. Two more men emerged from the van, but Lorenzo's security materialized from nowhere, engaging them with professional violence. Lorenzo pulled Emma behind him, his body a shield, one arm wrapped around her waist as he barked orders in rapid Italian. Within minutes, it was over. The attackers subdued or fled, police sirens wailing in the distance. Lorenzo turned to her, his hands framing her face, his eyes wild with something that looked like fear. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" His voice shook, and Emma realized this terrifying man was terrified for her. She shook her head, unable to speak, adrenaline crashing through her system. Lorenzo pulled her against his chest, his heart thundering beneath her ear. "You're moving in with me. Tonight." It wasn't a question. That night, Emma found herself in Lorenzo's penthouse, a sprawling space overlooking the city with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked like art. He'd been gentle but firm, collecting essentials from her apartment while his men secured the building, his jaw tight with barely restrained fury. Someone had tried to take her. Someone had dared touch what was his. Emma stood in his living room, wrapped in one of his shirts because her hands wouldn't stop shaking enough to change into her own clothes, and watched him pace like a caged predator. "I should have moved faster. Should have anticipated this." His accent thickened with emotion, his hands flexing at his sides. Emma moved toward him without thinking, her palm pressing against his chest. "You saved me." He caught her wrist, his thumb stroking over her racing pulse. "And I will spend every day of my life ensuring no one ever threatens you again." The intensity in his eyes stole her breath, the promise in his words wrapping around her like chains made of silk. She should be scared. Instead, she felt safe for the first time in years. Lorenzo's free hand cupped her jaw, tilting her face up to his. "Tell me to stop, Piccola. Tell me you don't feel this between us, and I'll walk away." But Emma couldn't lie. Especially not to him. She'd never been good at lying. Emma's lips parted, her breath coming faster as Lorenzo's thumb traced her bottom lip with devastating gentleness, his dark eyes searching hers for permission, for surrender. "I feel it." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough. Lorenzo's mouth claimed hers with a hunger that had been building since that first moment in the rain, his kiss demanding and reverent simultaneously, like he was worshipping and conquering her in the same breath. Emma melted against him, her fingers clutching his shirt as he deepened the kiss, his hands sliding into her hair, tilting her head to take more of her. Heat flooded her body, desire pooling low in her belly as he walked her backward toward his bedroom, never breaking contact, his lips moving from her mouth to her jaw, her throat, finding every sensitive spot that made her gasp. When they reached his bed, Lorenzo pulled back just enough to look at her, his chest heaving, restraint visible in every tense line of his body. "Are you sure, Bella? Once we cross this line, you're mine." "Completely." Emma answered by pulling him down to her, and the world dissolved into sensation, into whispered promises and gasping breaths, into the feeling of being completely consumed and cherished simultaneously, until there was nothing left but them and the thunder of two hearts beating as one. The next morning, Emma woke alone in Lorenzo's massive bed, sunlight streaming through windows she didn't remember, her body deliciously sore in ways that made her blush. Panic seized her chest as reality crashed back in. What had she done? She'd slept with a man she barely knew, a dangerous man, a man who probably saw her as just another conquest. She could hear voices in the hallway, Lorenzo speaking in rapid Italian, his tone sharp with command. Emma dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, her hands trembling as she pulled on her shoes. She needed to leave before this became more complicated, before he could see the vulnerability written all over her face, before he could reject her and shatter the fragile thing blooming in her chest. She slipped through the penthouse quietly, finding the private elevator, her heart breaking with every step. This was better. Cleaner. She'd saved them both the awkward morning after conversation where he explained this was just physical, just temporary. The elevator doors closed on Lorenzo's world, and Emma told herself the tears streaming down her face were relief, not regret. She almost believed it. By midday, Emma was back at the diner, throwing herself into work with desperate focus, ignoring the 12 missed calls and countless texts lighting up her phone. Lorenzo's messages shifted from confused to concerned to demanding. "Where are you? Why did you leave? Emma, answer me now." She couldn't. What would she even say? That she'd fallen for him completely and couldn't bear to see indifference in those dark eyes that had looked at her with such intensity last night? Her co-worker Maria noticed her distraction, nudging her with a knowing smile. Rough night? Emma forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. Something like that. She was refilling coffee pots when the diner door slammed open hard enough to rattle the windows. Lorenzo stood in the entrance, his suit rumpled, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it, his expression absolutely feral. His eyes locked on Emma with laser focus, and every conversation in the diner died instantly. The air crackled with tension as he stalked toward her, customers scrambling out of his path. Emma's heart lodged in her throat, her body responding to his presence even as her mind screamed at her to run. When Lorenzo reached her, he didn't speak. He simply took the coffee pot from her trembling hands, set it down with carefully controlled violence, and gripped her face between his palms. "You left." His voice was raw, devastated. "You left me like last night meant nothing." Emma tried to pull away, tried to protect herself from the inevitable rejection. "It's better this way. You don't owe me anything just because we slept together. I understand how this works." Lorenzo's eyes flashed with something dangerous, his jaw clenching so hard she heard his teeth grind. "You understand nothing." His thumb stroked her cheek, belying the intensity in his voice. "Last night wasn't just sex, Piccola. It was a claiming. It was a promise. And you will never run from me again." The possessiveness in his tone should have scared her. Instead, it made something inside her chest expand painfully, hope warring with fear. "I thought you'd regret it." "Regret us?" Lorenzo laughed, the sound harsh and broken. "Regret you?" "Emma, I've been searching the entire city for 3 hours, terrified something had happened to you, ready to burn down every building until I found you." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged. "You are not a regret. You are everything." The diner had gone completely silent, every eye watching them, but Emma couldn't bring herself to care. "You mean that?" Lorenzo's kiss was his answer, claiming her mouth in front of God and everyone, marking her as his for the whole world to see. Later that evening, Lorenzo took Emma back to his penthouse, but this time she went willingly, her hand clasped firmly in his, their fingers intertwined like they'd been made to fit together. He'd made her call in sick to both her jobs, his tone brooking no argument. "You're not going anywhere until we talk. Really talk." She sat on his leather couch, accepting the wine he poured her, watching as he settled beside her, close but not crowding. "I need you to understand something, Bella. My world is dangerous. There are people who would use you to hurt me, which is why you're staying here where I can protect you properly." Emma took a sip of wine, liquid courage warming her throat. "I can't just move in with you, Lorenzo. I have responsibilities, bills to pay, a life." His expression softened, his hand finding her knee. "Your bills are paid. All of them. I took care of it this afternoon." Anger sparked through her exhaustion. "You can't just pay my bills without asking. That's not how relationships work." He leaned closer, his scent overwhelming her senses, cedar, and something uniquely him. "Then tell me how a relationship works, because I've never felt this before. I've never wanted to protect someone, possess someone, worship someone the way I want to with you." His honesty disarmed her completely, stealing her breath. The following week, Emma settled into Lorenzo's world with surprising ease, learning the rhythms of his life, the way his business demanded his attention at odd hours, the loyal men who guarded them both, the quiet moments when he was just a man who held her like she was precious. He'd converted one of his spare rooms into a studio for her, filling it with art supplies and easels, encouraging the painters she'd buried years ago. "You have a gift, Bella. Don't waste it, because life was cruel." She painted while he worked, losing herself in colors and textures, feeling pieces of herself she'd forgotten existed slowly stitching back together. Lorenzo would find her covered in paint, pull her onto his lap regardless of the mess, and kiss her until she forgot everything except how he made her feel. They established routines. Morning coffee on his balcony, overlooking the city. Dinners where he taught her Italian phrases that made him smile. Nights where he worshipped her body with a devotion that left her trembling and boneless. Emma had never been so happy, so complete, and that terrified her more than any threat. But danger never stayed away long. 3 weeks after Emma moved in, Lorenzo came home tense, his jaw tight, fury radiating from every line of his body. "We have a problem." He pulled her into his office, closing the door with ominous finality. "Marco Santoro is back in the city." Emma frowned, unfamiliar with the name. "Who is Marco Santoro?" Lorenzo poured himself whiskey, downing it in one swallow. "The man who killed your father." Emma's world tilted, her knees buckling before Lorenzo caught her, guiding her to a chair with gentle hands that contrasted the violence in his eyes. "My father's death was ruled an accident. A car crash." His hands gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "It was made to look like an accident. Marco orchestrated it because your father refused to give him information about my family's operations. He died protecting my secrets, and now Marco is back, asking questions about you." Emma felt bile rise in her throat, grief and rage warring inside her chest. "You're telling me my father was murdered, and his killer is walking free?" Lorenzo knelt before her, his expression carved from stone. "Not for long. I'm telling you because Marco will come for you, and I need you to trust me to handle this." His hands framed her face, desperate intensity burning in his eyes. "Promise me you won't do anything foolish. Promise me you'll stay here where you're safe." But Emma was already planning, already thinking about justice delayed, about the man who'd stolen her father and walked away unpunished. That night, Emma couldn't sleep, rage keeping her awake as Lorenzo's breathing evened out beside her. She slipped from bed carefully, padding through the dark penthouse to Lorenzo's office. She knew he kept files, information, details about everyone in his world. She found the Santoro file easily, her hands shaking as she read through the contents. "Marco Santoro. Runs gambling operations on the east side. Frequents Sal's bar on Thursday nights." Today was Thursday. Emma made her decision in the space between heartbeats, changing into dark clothes, slipping past Lorenzo's sleeping form, bypassing his security with tactics she'd learned from watching them for weeks. She would find Marco Santoro. She would look into the eyes of her father's killer. And then she would decide what justice looked like. Sal's bar was exactly as seedy as she'd imagined, cigarette smoke hanging heavy in the air, dangerous men conducting dangerous business. Emma spotted Marco immediately, his profile matching the photo she'd memorized, sitting in a corner booth surrounded by his crew. She approached with her heart in her throat, every survival instinct screaming at her to run. "Marco Santoro?" He looked up, his eyes traveling over her with oily appraisal. "And who's asking, beautiful?" Emma's hands clenched into fists. "I'm Emma Carter. You killed my father." The temperature in the bar dropped 20 degrees, Marco's expression shifting from amused to calculating. His men stood, hands moving to concealed weapons, but Marco waved them down. "Tony Carter's daughter. I wondered if you'd eventually figure it out." His smile was cruel. "Your old man died because he was loyal to the wrong people." Emma's vision blurred with rage. "You murdered him." He shrugged, utterly unconcerned. "I did what needed to be done. Just like I'll do what needs to be done now." He gestured to his men. "Take her." Before they could move, the bar's door exploded inward. Lorenzo entered like an avenging angel, his security team flanking him, weapons drawn. His eyes found Emma instantly, relief and fury warring across his features before he focused on Marco with lethal intent. Touch her and die. His voice was soft, deadly, a promise carved in blood. Marco laughed, the sound nervous now. Valentino, didn't expect to see you here. Lorenzo moved through the bar with purposeful strides, positioning himself between Emma and every threat in the room. You murdered one of my men. You threaten what's mine. His hand found Emma's wrist, pulling her behind him. Those are capital offenses in my world. Marco's confidence cracked. Now wait a minute. We can discuss this. There's nothing to discuss. Lorenzo's gun appeared in his hand with practiced ease. You're dead. You just don't know it yet. What happened next unfolded in seconds that felt like hours. Marco's men reached for their weapons, but Lorenzo's security was faster, better trained, deadlier. Gunfire erupted in controlled bursts, tables overturning, glass shattering, screams echoing through the bar as civilians scrambled for exits. Lorenzo shielded Emma with his body, his free arm wrapped around her waist as he returned fire with cold precision, each shot finding its mark. Marco tried to run, scrambling toward the back exit, but Lorenzo was relentless. He handed Emma off to his second-in-command with a single word in Italian, then pursued Marco with single-minded focus. Emma watched helplessly as Lorenzo cornered her father's killer in the alley behind the bar, the sounds of their struggle carrying through the night air. When Lorenzo returned minutes later, his knuckles were bloody, his suit jacket torn, but Marco Santoro would never threaten anyone again. Lorenzo's eyes found Emma in the chaos, dark and wild and absolutely feral. His hands cupped her face, checking her for injuries with shaking fingers. What were you thinking? You could have been killed. His voice cracked on the last word, and Emma saw the terror beneath his anger, the absolute devastation of almost losing her. I needed to face him, needed to look him in the eye. Lorenzo's forehead pressed against hers, his breath ragged. You almost destroyed me tonight, Piccola. If something had happened to you, there would be nothing left of me worth saving. The drive back to the penthouse was silent, tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Lorenzo's jaw was clenched so tight Emma worried his teeth would crack, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. When they reached his building, he guided her into the private elevator with a hand at her lower back, the touch burning through her clothes. The moment the elevator doors closed, he exploded. Do you have any idea what you put me through tonight? Waking up to find you gone, realizing you'd snuck past my security, tracking you to that bar, and seeing you surrounded by armed men? His accent thickened with emotion, his eyes wild. I aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Emma lifted her chin, refusing to apologize for seeking justice. He killed my father, Lorenzo. What did you expect me to do? I expected you to trust me. His hands framed her face, his touch surprisingly gentle despite the fury in his voice. I told you I would handle it. Instead, you risked everything, including your life, because you couldn't wait. The elevator doors opened to his penthouse, but neither of them moved. Emma's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. I've been waiting 5 years for justice. 5 years thinking my father died in a random accident. I couldn't wait another day. Lorenzo's expression crumbled, understanding replacing anger. Oh, Bella. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as the tears finally came, 5 years of grief pouring out against his chest. Later that night, after Emma had cried herself empty, Lorenzo carried her to the bathroom, running a hot bath with gentle efficiency. He undressed her carefully, his touch clinical and comforting, then lifted her into the water before stripping his own blood-stained clothes and sliding in behind her. Emma leaned back against his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. I'm sorry. Her voice was hoarse from crying. I should have trusted you. I should have let you handle it. Lorenzo's lips pressed against her temple, lingering there. I understand why you didn't. But Emma, you have to understand something too. His arms tightened around her. You are my entire world now. The thought of losing you, of anything happening to you, it's the only thing that truly terrifies me. If protecting you means you hate me, I'll accept that. But I will not compromise your safety. Not ever. Emma turned in his arms, water sloshing around them, her hands cupping his jaw. I don't hate you. I love you. The words escaped before she could stop them, hanging in the steamy air between them. Lorenzo went completely still, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. Say that again. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. I love you, Lorenzo. I think I've loved you since that first moment in the cemetery, when you looked at me like I was something precious instead of broken. Lorenzo's kiss was devastating, pouring 5 years of his own grief and loneliness into claiming her mouth, his hands tangling in her wet hair as he pulled her fully against him. Ti amo, Bella. Ti amo più della mia vita. I love you more than my life. He lifted her from the bath, carrying her dripping wet to his bed, laying her down with reverent care. Let me show you how much. What followed was worship, pure and simple, Lorenzo mapping every inch of her body with his hands and mouth, whispering promises in Italian against her skin, making her fall apart again and again until she was trembling and boneless and completely his. When he finally joined their bodies, moving inside her with exquisite slowness, Emma felt tears slip down her temples, overwhelmed by the intimacy, by the way he watched her like she was his salvation. Mine, Lorenzo breathed against her lips, his movements becoming more desperate. Say it, Emma. Tell me you're mine. Yours, she gasped, her body tightening around him. Always yours. They shattered together, her name on his lips like a prayer, and Emma knew with absolute certainty that she would never belong to anyone else. The following morning brought unexpected complications. Emma woke to find Lorenzo already dressed, speaking in rapid Italian on his phone, his expression grim. When he noticed her awake, he ended the call immediately, moving to sit beside her on the bed. We have a problem, Bella. The Santoro family is calling for retaliation. Marco had brothers, and they want blood for his death. Emma's stomach dropped, fear icing her veins. What does that mean for us? It means you're not leaving this penthouse until I've neutralized the threat. His hand cupped her cheek, thumbs stroking her skin. I've called in favors, reached out to neutral parties. There will be a sit-down negotiations. But until then, you stay here where you're safe. Emma wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle herself, but the memory of last night's violence was too fresh.
How long?
However long it takes. Days, maybe weeks. His eyes held hers. I know asking you to be patient is difficult, but I need you to trust me.
Can you do that?
Emma nodded, understanding the gravity in his expression. I trust you. Relief flooded his features, and he kissed her with desperate tenderness before leaving to face whatever dangers awaited him in the city below. The next 3 days were torture. Lorenzo left early and returned late, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, blood on his clothes more often than not, though he swore none of it was his. Emma painted frantically in her studio, trying to channel her anxiety into art, creating violent swirls of red and black that reflected her internal chaos. Lorenzo's men stood guard throughout the penthouse, polite but immovable, ensuring she stayed put. On the 4th day, Lorenzo didn't come home at all. Emma paced until dawn, calling his phone repeatedly, each unanswered ring ratcheting her panic higher. When his second-in-command finally called, his voice was carefully neutral. Miss Carter, Mr. Valentino asked me to inform you he's handling a situation. He'll be home soon. What situation? Where is he?
A pause.
There was an ambush. He's fine, but he's ensuring it doesn't happen again. The line went dead. Emma's hands shook as she dialed Lorenzo's number again, her mind conjuring horrific scenarios. When he finally walked through the door 6 hours later, covered in blood and swaying with exhaustion, Emma launched herself at him, checking him frantically for injuries. Are you hurt? Whose blood is this?
Talk to me.
Lorenzo caught her hands, pressing them to his chest where his heart thundered. Not mine, Bella. I'm fine. But his eyes told a different story, haunted and hollow. What happened? Emma demanded, guiding him to sit before he collapsed. Lorenzo pulled her onto his lap, burying his face in her neck, breathing her in like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning. The Santoro brothers ambushed our meeting. Killed 2 of my men before we could respond. His voice broke on the words.
Good men.
Men with families. Emma's heart shattered for him, for the weight he carried, for the violence that followed him like a shadow. She held him as his shoulders shook, this powerful man breaking down in her arms, and she realized the cost of his world was measured in blood and grief and impossible choices. I'm so sorry. Lorenzo lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and devastated. It's over now. The Santoro family has been dealt with. You're safe, and that's all that matters. But Emma could see it had cost him something vital, something that dimmed the light in his eyes. She spent the rest of the day taking care of him, running him a bath, making him eat, holding him while he slept fitfully against her chest. This was the reality of loving Lorenzo Valentino. This was the price of their happiness. And despite everything, Emma knew she would pay it gladly, because losing him would destroy her more completely than any bullet ever could. 2 weeks later, life slowly returned to normal, though Emma knew nothing would truly be the same. Lorenzo was more protective, more possessive, barely letting her out of his sight. He'd reduced his business obligations, delegating more to his lieutenants, prioritizing time with her like she was the only thing that mattered. They established new routines. Morning runs together with security trailing discreetly behind. Afternoons in her studio, where he'd work on his laptop while she painted. Evenings exploring the city, Lorenzo showing her his favorite hidden restaurants, teaching her about Italian culture and cuisine. Nights where they made love with desperate intensity, both of them hyper-aware of how easily they could have lost each other. Emma was painting in her studio one afternoon when Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically nervous. She set down her brush, immediately concerned. What's wrong? He crossed to her, taking her paint-stained hands in his. Nothing's wrong. Everything is perfect.
Which is why I need to ask you something.
He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. Marry me, Emma. He opened the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring, simple and elegant and absolutely perfect. Marry me, and let me spend the rest of my life protecting you, worshipping you, loving you the way you deserve. Tears flooded Emma's eyes, her heart so full she thought it might burst.
Yes.
Oh God, yes. 6 months later, Emma walked down the aisle of a small church, her hand tucked into the arm of Lorenzo's second-in-command since she had no father to give her away. Lorenzo stood at the altar in a tailored tuxedo, his eyes never leaving her face, tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks as she approached. They spoke their vows in both English and Italian, promising forever, promising always, promising to love each other through whatever darkness the world threw at them. When the priest pronounced them married, Lorenzo kissed her with such reverence that the entire church erupted in applause. The reception was held at Lorenzo's family estate, hundreds of guests celebrating their union, but Emma only had eyes for her husband, for the way he held her during their first dance like she was something sacred. They cut the cake, toasted with champagne, danced until her feet ached in her heels. As the evening wound down, Lorenzo pulled her aside, his hand resting on her flat stomach with meaningful intent. I want everything with you, Bella. A family. Children who have your eyes and my stubbornness. A life so full of love that all the darkness fades. Emma kissed him softly. Then, let's start now. 1 year later, Emma stood in the nursery she and Lorenzo had decorated together, holding their 3-month-old daughter, Sofia Isabella Valentino. The baby had Lorenzo's dark eyes and Emma's smile, and watching her husband cradle their child with infinite gentleness made Emma's heart overflow daily. Lorenzo entered the nursery, fresh from a business meeting, his face softening the moment he saw his girls. How are my 2 favorite people? He kissed Emma deeply before taking Sofia, who immediately grabbed his finger with her tiny fist. She's perfect, Emma murmured, watching them together. Just like her mother. Lorenzo settled into the rocking chair, Sofia already drowsing against his chest, and gestured for Emma to join them. She curled against his side, his arm wrapping around her shoulders, their daughter between them sleeping peacefully. Do you remember that day in the cemetery? Emma asked softly. When I found you standing over my father's grave. Lorenzo's lips brushed her temple. Best day of my life. Even though you looked at me like I was a criminal. You are a criminal, she teased, and he laughed quietly. True. But I'm your criminal. And you're stuck with me forever. Emma looked at her family, at this life they'd built from tragedy and danger and impossible love, and smiled. I wouldn't have it any other way. They sat together as evening fell, 3 hearts beating in sync, proof that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the darkest places, and that true love really can conquer everything, even death, even fear, even the dangerous world of a man who would burn it all down to keep his family safe. And as Sophia stirred against her father's chest, Emma knew their story was just beginning, that there would be more challenges ahead, more danger, more moments of fear. But they would face it all together, this family forged in fire and sealed in love, forever bound by vows spoken and promises kept, living proof that home isn't a place, but the people who look at you like you're their entire world, and that sometimes the most terrifying men have the most beautiful hearts.